This is Data-Driven Diversity. My name is Lashana Lewis, and I am going to just kind of talk through some of the things that I've learned throughout the years, a little bit of research that I've done to try to make an argument for why diversity is an imperative. And at the timing of this video, we've all seen the Black Lives Matter protests, and we've seen a lot of things happen on the racial equity front. Very hopeful and very aware that change is needed, and it's an exciting time. So this this presentation comes at a really good time here. But I'll go through a little bit about who I am and how I got to doing research on diversity within the data realm, and we'll get started. My name is Lashana Lewis. I'm director of the St. Louis Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective. And basically, I've been doing tech for about 20 or so years. I started off doing a lot of customer service, although I did go to school for computer science. At the time, there weren't a lot of women of color that were actually in the tech field, and we'll get a little bit into that later. But during my time of being in customer service, I actually ended up getting myself certified as a PC technician. Then later on, fortunately, I was able to work at MasterCard through a program called Launch Code that actually placed people with non-traditional tech backgrounds into full-time positions in the tech field. And during the first 6 months, I went on ahead and tried my luck, ended up getting certified as a server engineer, so certified to work on any type of computer server. Um, some of the things that I've done throughout life is I was actually able to be one of the co-founders of the LGBT Center of St. Louis that started in St. Louis in about 2004. I and a handful of other people in the St. Louis area actually worked together to create the foundation for a community center, and it ran in the location for about 4 years. In 2011, I decided to take a backseat and focus a little bit more on my studies. So left it over and changed it over to other hands. Um, as of late, I used to work at MasterCard, as I said, and one of the things that I did is I was involved heavily with the employee resource group for the LGBT community. That will come into play here as I go and talk a little bit more about some of the factors and methods that I used to make an argument as to why diversity is not only nice to have, but also an imperative. Something really cool that happened, I said that I went through Launch Code, and actually that organization was recognized by former President Barack Obama um, in 2015. Uh, President Obama heard about my story, heard about my struggles in tech, um, helped formulate and put together a $100 million effort that was put across the nation that really laid the foundation for other programs like Launch Code to go and surface people who probably didn't come from the most traditional background with tech, but decided that they wanted to try their hands in it and just needed an extra chance. So a lot of programs like Launch Code that I went through, fortunately enough, I was already certified and already had computer programming experience. So I only ended up going through the apprenticeship portion, but it actually afforded other organizations to have something in addition to that as like training programs, et cetera. But very fun time. I was invited to the White House during, or as a guest of the White House during this announcement. So always kind of fun to include in my slides. But as I said, I was a computer geek, and some people kind of wonder how did I get into diversity. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I actually decided to focus on the tech talent pipeline for a while. It was something that I was really heavily involved in. Obviously, no doubt, a lot of the experience that happened right after the talk with President Obama was more so of people asking me about my experience. So I talked a lot about what it meant to me personally. There were other magazine articles done, which kind of led to me finding out about all of this research about diversity and technology that I didn't even know about or was aware. It kind of helped me to shape what diversity looks like, diversity and inclusion efforts should look like. And I was able to kind of lend out that knowledge. So I tell people I had two jobs. In the daytime, I was a computer geek, typing away and doing coding and fixing servers. But at night, I would be on speaking panels and talking about what diversity and tech meant to me and lending any knowledge that usually was very new to me to others. So, being the type of person I am, I decided to do a little bit more research, and that's kind of how we got to where we are today. So here, I just want to kind of recap the virtual poster that I did. It is a little hard to read, but it's here. It should be up on the CG Scholar website, and you should be able to see a little bit more detail about kind of the scientific method I went through as far as trying to figure out the best way to explain what diversity means and how to kind of take that data and use it to build a case um, regarding how diversity could play an important factor in businesses. So let's get into some examples. Why does DEI matter? Well, companies are already prioritizing diversity. According to a survey done by LinkedIn.com, a workforce diversity report that they put together, 49% want to represent their customer base more accurately. And seeing that the customer base is starting to change a bit and becoming more and more diverse, that's something very important for companies to consider now and down the road. 62% want to improve performance, and 78% want to boost company culture. I found this map here through the Cooper Center's website, and someone decided to put together, I believe the person's name is Dustin Cable, decided to put together on a map a dot for every single person that answered on the census. So what you see there is a color map, but it's actually little dots if you get in very, very close. So the additional thing that Dustin decided to do is actually colorize those dots. So the color was based off of whatever the person identified ethnically as on the census. So this is an area that I'm very familiar with. This is the St. Louis region. And many people talk about the digital divide and Delmar divide in St. Louis. There's even a popular couple of articles done about it. And when they're talking about the divide, it's actually right around here. If you can see my mouse cursor there. And right where you see that division, you see a lot of blue dots south of there and green dots north. But this is primarily Black residential area. It's primarily white residential area, and there's Asian dotted within. But that dividing line right there is actually Delmar. So it is real, and this is census data as of 2010. We're now in 2020, so I'd be very interested to see how that data actually changes. Some of the things I decided to do was a little bit of research of articles that already contained a lot of information. Like I said, I was featured in some articles, and that kind of led me into research about other articles and some of the data and percentage rates that they were able to find. One of the things I did find in one article here, you can see where the tech industry doesn't have a plan for dealing with bias and facial recognition. As we're aware, facial recognition is starting to become a very, very popular thing with devices of all kinds. And it still looks like there's a lot of issues with it. This article was pulled in 2018, so not that far away, where you see that the error rates are up to 35% higher when detecting the gender of dark-skinned women. And we have to think about that as the customer base is starting to change. I like to say that it's becoming browner. So when we're starting to implement these technologies, we got to think about the customers that will be using them and what they look like. Another one in particular that I pulled out was about the female crash test dummy. Obviously, there's been female crash test dummies for a while, but for a very, very long time, um, none of them were actually placed in the driver's seat. Actually, I think it wasn't until 2011 through University of Virginia kind of highlights some percentage rates there. But in 2011, that's when a major shift was being made to actually start putting female crash test dummies in the driver's seat. So that has a lot of impact, especially when I do this talk in front of audiences and I ask people how many people have a car that's made prior to 2011. And it was a women in tech conference, and more than half raised their hand. And I said, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but it looks like your car was not necessarily made for you to actually be in the driver's seat. So it's a very, very shocking number. I'm glad that that change is made, but it's something that a lot of people feel was something that should have been obviously looked at. And then we're looking at things within the sight impaired community with this article from Forbes, and this is 2017. At first, when I saw it, I was like, surely this was like early 2000s. The internet was very new. It's very hard to make things ADA compliant, but this is 2017. It's not even really 3 years ago, where someone actually went through the problem of trying to have a website that was screen reader compliant for a very popular grocery store chain. In this case, it was Winn-Dixie. And the argument was made that the reason why it wasn't made accessible was because it wasn't the actual store. But later rulings found out that because the offerings on the website were the same as the offerings on the store, and ADA compliance applies to both physical buildings as well as the website. So the funny thing is that the company thought they needed to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to get the site compliant with ADA, and actually they only needed to spend about 30,000, I believe. So it's a lot to kind of think about and ingest when we're looking at ways of thinking when it comes to being diverse. The last one here that I have is an article from eHarmony, about eHarmony from Reuters, and they're talking about how some folks in California sued eHarmony for not including profiles for same-sex dating. And the argument that eHarmony had was that they didn't have enough data on that, which to me says, well, this is the perfect opportunity to collect data. So why wouldn't you take that chance? But they were trying to go for a market that they were, I believe, more sure about based off of data that was already available. But come to find out, in the state of California, it was illegal at that time to discriminate. And this is 2007, against same-sex couples and or people who are homosexual, gays, lesbians, and bisexual. So the company ended up having to change their policy. So we'll go back here and we'll talk about the MasterCard example. So actually, I talked about how I was leading the LGBT organization, but one of the goals and objectives that I had was to actually drive a more business-based case with the company. And part of that was actually talking about how being more involved in the community would tie into the business bottom line, highlighting continual demographic focus, and then I provided some supporting measurable guides. All of that to try to talk on a very high level about some of the things that I thought were essential. First, I started where you hit people in the pocket. I started with estimating the buying power of different communities. And this has been gathered within the last 3 or 4 years. Some of these numbers have changed, some not very much. But as you can see, with LGBT Americans, it's starting to get up to that $1 trillion line. This graph goes from 0 to 1.2 trillion. And the reason why $1 trillion is important is because at that point in time, that's when ad agencies and marketing agencies start turning their eyes towards marketing to a particular demographic. I would put white Americans here, but it's way, way up there. It's way past $1 trillion. But what I found interesting is African American and Hispanic Americans have reached $1 trillion. Asian Americans are very, very close. And LGBT Americans are starting to be kind of the next phase, but starting to make a climb are adults with disabilities. Now with the advent of technology and remote working and ADA accessibility options, a lot of adults with disabilities are now able to find gainful employment and live a lot more independently and be able to also use some of those funds to be able to purchase things. And this is buying power. This is not paying bills or anything like that. This is how many dollars people usually have to spend after bills are paid. So this is more of disposable income. So one of the things after I showed that, and I showed that the market is there, is I talked about how the St. Louis population and pride festivals were starting to kind of align in a certain way. As you can see, the dark gray at the top represents St. Louis County, and the lighter gray at the bottom of that graph represents St. Louis City. St. Louis County surrounds St. Louis City, so it's St. Louis City is not a part of St. Louis County. And there's a whole long explanation about that. That's for a later topic. But in essence, what we started to notice with Pride Festival attendance that was always reported in the news and through different sources was that it was starting to rise. So we were like, okay, well, what's happening here? What's accounting for that rise? Well, I did a little bit of digging and I found out that right around the time, if you go back to this graph and you look, and you start to see in 2014, 2015, 2016, that's when that rise is starting to happen. That's when satellite prides were also starting to be established in the St. Louis region. So Black Pride, St. Charles Pride, which is a suburb outside of St. Louis County, even Metro East Illinois Pride. These are all prides within the metropolitan region that was starting to pop up and become a lot more heavily attended. Supreme Court Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed in 2010. So the after effects of that accounts for more comfortability with people in the military, within the LGBT community, and St. Louis is actually a stone's throw away from a Air Force base. Same-sex marriage became legal in 2014 for Missouri, and then 2015 for the entire United States. So again, if we go back to that graph, we start to see right here is when you're starting to see this increase, this uptake. The other thing that I found very interesting is that the Human Rights Campaign in the United States, which is and I believe Human Rights Campaign may have global presence as well, but they're mostly known for having this corporate index. where it's basically these are the companies that are very LGBT friendly because they've done all of these different standard changes, standard operating procedure changes, guideline changes, et cetera, and so forth within their companies. But in addition to the corporate index, they also have what's called a municipal index, which actually looks at city and county and I believe even state to kind of say on a scale of about 1 to 100, what kind of different points do each of these areas cover when it comes to LGBT rights and LGBT protections. So on that scale, I found out that there are 100 standard points and then 22 what are called bonus points. So things that would really kind of put people over the edge. And sometimes cities end up earning these extra points. And it could be protections that are upcoming but not necessarily implemented at the time. For St. Louis, we actually had 106.98 of those standard 100 points plus 8 bonus points. And to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, this is actually the Municipal Equality Index score for 2018 for the city of St. Louis. And as you can see, it's actually broken up into 5 sections. There's non-discrimination law, municipality as employer, municipal services, law enforcement, leadership on LGBT equality. But this, what you're seeing here graphically, is just the first section. And of that, you can just see that St. Louis has earned 30 out of 30 points, which I'm very, very proud about. But and it breaks it down into something that's digestible, something that people can actually wrap their heads around. And with all of that, with all of this data presented, that was kind of that case that the LGBT community is becoming more and more of a forefront. And with more freedoms comes people's ability to feel like they can more so express themselves in a more freer fashion. That could lead to being more interested in products, in particular products that are very supportive to the message that's important to the LGBT community. So one of the outcomes was increased sponsorship and presence. The company decided to double down and collaborate with other employee resource groups to bring a more LGBT presence. Actually, I combined with the African American or African diaspora employee resource group in MasterCard to sponsor Black Pride for the first time. MasterCard actually ended up sponsoring Pride Festival, the actual full-blown festival with attendees topping close to 300,000, which would put their name everywhere as a result, but obviously identify themselves solidly within that community. And something internal that happened was HR level self-identification for individuals who are LGBT plus and or have a disability. So that became something very prevalent that made a lot of important people within the company show that we needed to show our pride in the people that we have working within our sphere and our community. Now, from all of this, there are some conclusions that I had, but I really kind of wanted to put them in takeaways. Because although this is kind of more of a formal-ish kind of presentation, I still wanted people to feel like they could walk away with something. So I end up having 5 takeaways for what you see here. You don't have to be a D&I expert to make a difference. One of the things that a lot of people do once they see this presentation, and they're just like, I really want to help, but I don't know how to get started. And you've done all this data, and I'm not a D&I expert. And I'm like, really not very many people are. We're all starting off where we're starting off, right? So certifications are great. You can get them if you feel more comfortable with it, but you could really just get started now. Your skills as a data analyst, as a scientist, can shed a light on diversity. I used my skills of research and gathering data to think more creatively about what I could do to help make more of an impact within a community that I cared about. Um, you can use that data to help drive organizational goals. So think about the metrics that a company might pay attention to. That's something that I found was very, very important to consider. And when I started considering that, that's when it started to really kind of shine that we could actually put more of a focus within that particular demographic, within the LGBT community, as well as others, as long as we were kind of more abundantly aware of the spending power and the presence within that community, within our region. And just kind of as a backup, MasterCard has two major offices, one in Purchase, New York, and the other one in the regional St. Louis um, area. So that's why I kind of pulled up the St. Louis data, because at the time I was working within the St. Louis office. And if you have that data, take some time to think differently. A lot of times, companies use that raw data to understand what exists instead of what could be. And I say that a lot because when we're looking at data, we might be thinking about, okay, this is what the data says, and this is how this might go. But instead of thinking about it that way, maybe we can think about how can we make an impact within a particular region or demographic. The fifth takeaway I have is something that's an easy, free resource that I found very helpful. It's called the implicit bias test. Harvard University has it on their website. The website is implicit.harvard.edu. You can take it mobily if you want to take it on your phone. After a few seconds on your phone and you get to that website, you'll see a little pop-up that says, hey, I noticed that you're trying to take this on your phone. Do you want to do the touchscreen version of this? And basically what it does is that it allows you to take a variety of different tests that look at any hidden or unconscious bias that you might have uh, within a particular genre. So it could be race, it could be gender, religion. You see here on this one, I have Asian American, weight, gender. I know it says there in the graphic email address, you do not have to enter in an email address in order to take any of the tests. They're totally anonymous. And I will just say that I've done it a variety of times. And with each time that I end up doing it, I usually give myself a few months in between. I see different results, and it tells me what my progress is as far as addressing any implicit bias that I may have myself. All right, and that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. You may reach out to me through these different forms on LinkedIn. At the end, I think it's linkedin.com/NIN/Lashana Lewis, or you can Google and figure me out from LinkedIn that way. I'm often on Twitter, so you may tweet at me at LMLewis517. I'm also on Facebook. But usually I'm not corresponding a lot to people through there. But if you so like, I'm available through there as well. So thank you for attending this presentation. I'm looking forward to hearing back from you if you have any comments.